The French and Indian War ended in British victory. With the war behind them, the British faced two great challenges: how to pay down their national debt, which had swelled dramatically during the war, and how to rein in the American colonists, who had grown increasingly independent. On February 13, 1765, the British tried their hand at solving both problems. The solution? A new law. Its name derived from the smallest form of public documentation. It was the Stamp Act of 1765. But the colonists didn't see it as a small matter at all. Their response was outrage. The act ended up a failure. The British attempt at imposing a firmer hand on their American subjects resolved neither their debt crisis nor reinvigorated their rule. Instead, it caused the first major stirrings of the American Revolution. Like all forms of taxation, the Stamp Act was intended to generate revenue for the government. The newfound income would help draw down the British debt. It would also provide funds for the expanded army needed to secure the newly won North American territories in Canada to the north, and between the Appalachians and the Mississippi River to the west. By this time, the British had already begun to rein in the colonists. Immediately at the end of the 7 Years' War in 1763, they issued the Proclamation Line, which restricted the colonists from settling in lands beyond the Appalachians in territory newly acquired from the French. That prohibition came at a time of American population growth and a corresponding need for new land and opportunities. The American colonists were anxious to expand their territory and their wealth. With the Proclamation Line, Britain curbed both expansions. The British had already introduced taxation in the colonies. The 1764 Sugar Act levied indirect taxes on imported goods, textiles, coffee, indigo, and sugar. The Stamp Act directly taxed the commerce between the colonists by adding a tax to a wide range of printed materials, including almanacs, newspapers, wills and other legal documents, even playing cards. A government stamp would be embossed on each printed product, indicating that the tax had been paid. It was not the level of taxation that so angered Americans. Because the Stamp Act directly impacted the publication of pamphlets, newspapers, and government documents, the colonists perceived the tax as an imposition on free speech and self-government. On May 30, 1765, speaking before the Virginia House of Burgesses, Patrick Henry roused his fellow legislators with these targeted words: "Caesar had his Brutus, Charles I his Cromwell, and George III may profit from their example." In October of that year, delegates from 9 colonies met in New York City for what has become known as the Stamp Act Congress. Claiming their rights as British subjects, the Congress issued a Declaration of Rights and Privileges. The heart of their contention was that there should be no taxation without representation. Among the delegates were the cousins John and Sam Adams. A secret organization called the Sons of Liberty formed to protest the Stamp Act through demonstrations, boycotts, and intimidation. Sam Adams was among the organization's leaders in Boston. In the years that followed, the Sons of Liberty would use intimidation tactics like tarring and feathering. They met in secret under what came to be known as Liberty trees. In Boston, it was an elm tree. In Charleston, South Carolina, a live oak. In one protest on August 14, 1765, Sons of Liberty in Boston hung an effigy of Andrew Oliver, the local Stamp Act administrator. Then they dragged it through the streets, set it on fire, and beheaded it. A mob gathered around the protesters. They soon ended up at Oliver's residence. There they knocked down the fence and looted his home, including his wine cellar. 3 days after the protest, Oliver stepped down. Other protests came in the form of colonial boycotts of British goods. The protests worked. British merchants felt the sting of lost sales and lobbied bitterly among members of Parliament. In the spring of 1766, the British gave up on this particular tactic. In March that year, they repealed the Stamp Act. Across the colonies, Americans celebrated with bonfires and gunfire. Boston Sons of Liberty erected an obelisk in honor of liberty. The British, however, were not done. At the same time that they repealed the Stamp Act, they issued the Declaratory Act of 1766, which asserted Parliament's right to legislate for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. The British remained insistent on their right to impose taxes on the colonists. But the Stamp Act and its defeat was a turning point in the relationship between the British government and her colonists in America. The whole disaster had sown more unity among the American colonies than they had ever experienced. It paved the way for the American Revolution. Of the year 1765, when the Stamp Act was enacted and when colonial rebellion against it struck back, John Adams had this remark: "It was the most remarkable year of my life."